Welcome to the third dimension. A United Nations-backed process to end Yemen's 10-year conflict appeared to be moving forward recently. But then, the war in Gaza began and tensions spilled over. The Houthis began a relentless campaign of missiles and drone attacks targeting ships in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The Houthis initially claimed their attacks were acts of solidarity with Palestinians facing Israeli bombardment in Gaza. However, as the strikes continued and the economic disruptions mounted, it became clear that the Houthi goals extended beyond just expressing support for the Palestinians. Meanwhile, in a bid to compel the Houthis to stop their attacks, the United States and the United Kingdom launched airstrikes against Houthi offensive capabilities. Yet, the attacks continued unabated. Compounding these challenges is a rapidly deteriorating humanitarian crisis described by the United Nations as the worst crisis in recent years. Amid all these challenges, moves to end Yemen's plight are at standstill, threatening further woe for a country on its knees. To impact this topic, joins me His Excellency Mr. Stephen Fagan, the United States Ambassador to Yemen. Ambassador Fagan brings to the role 3 decades in diplomatic service with the United States Department of State's Foreign Service. He has represented his country on the world stage, shaping international relations and policy decisions. As an accomplished diplomat, he has always promoted peace, cooperation, and positive global change. Mr. Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to join your show today.
Thank you. If we just start straight away, Mr. Ambassador, now a decade of conflict in Yemen, okay? After a decade of conflict in Yemen, how would you assess the current situation, and how much of a role has the United States played in resolving this bloody conflict?
No, thank you so much for that very important question. And look, this conflict, which has gone on for 10 years already, has been absolutely devastating for Yemen and its people, setting the country back by years. 400,000 Yemenis have died directly or indirectly as a result of the conflict. And it's created one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. This is absolutely appalling. When President Biden took office in 2021, he immediately raised U.S. efforts to try to bring about a comprehensive resolution to this conflict, which included naming a special envoy for Yemen on top of the role that I am in as ambassador. That special envoy is Tim Lenderking. And U.S. diplomacy, I believe, has been critical in the advances we have made in trying to resolve this conflict. In April 2022, as you know, under UN mediation, the conflict parties agreed to a truce. And while technically that truce has expired, the terms are largely being observed. And as a result, the conflict has been dramatically reduced in scope inside of Yemen, leading to real humanitarian gains. And that is absolutely something we want to preserve. And again, U.S. diplomacy has been a very big part of that. Unfortunately, the developments of the last few months have set back this process. These Houthi attacks on international shipping are disrupting global commerce, are impeding freedom of navigation. They are dangerous, they are illegal, they are frankly appalling, and they absolutely have to stop. but also in launching these attacks, well, these attacks are completely inconsistent with the peace process for Yemen. In fact, if we manage to further advance the peace process, we need to move from a truce to a permanent, durable ceasefire. And attacking shipping is exactly the opposite of a ceasefire.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
Okay. Now, to elaborate on Houthi attacks, Mr. Ambassador, okay, some observers say it seems the U.S. has been always supportive of the United Nations-led process in Yemen, okay? But because of this development, okay, now the focus is on containing the Houthi threat more than on what we call pushing for a political process. And this makes Yemenis worried. How do you respond?
Well, let me say the United States absolutely remains committed to supporting a UN-mediated Yemeni peace process, which is the only way to bring about a comprehensive and politically inclusive resolution of the conflict that will lead to peace and prosperity for Yemen and its people.
Okay.
But as I said earlier, what the Houthis are doing with these attacks is simply incompatible with this peace process. So this is fundamentally on the Houthis. It's their actions that have impeded this peace process.
Okay. Now, the United States has designated the Houthis as a terrorist group organization as a kind of putting pressure onto this rebel group, okay? The question is, do you see, Mr. Ambassador, do you see an evidence that this designation plus the airstrikes have deterred the groups?
Well, what I can say is this. I mean, our operations, supported by coalitions of countries, are out there doing their best to protect international shipping and restore freedom of navigation. Were we not to have these operations in place, to be frank, the Houthis would be hitting vessels. They might be sinking vessels. They'd be causing unbelievable environmental damage, possibly as well.
Yeah.
So these operations to protect shipping, to degrade Houthi capabilities have been absolutely critical to enabling shipping to continue to move through these waters. Regarding the sanction of the Houthis as a specially designated global terrorist, this has also been a critical effort to place economic pressure on the Houthis. We are confident they are feeling more pressure. At the same time, when we put this designation in place, we wanted the designation to hit the Houthis and pressure the Houthis and not harm the Yemeni people. And that's why, with the designation, the U.S. Treasury Department also issued a number of licenses to protect the Yemeni people.
Yeah.
These are licenses that facilitate the continued provision of humanitarian aid, that allow for and facilitate the import into northern areas of Yemen of basic commodities, licenses that also facilitate Yemenis continuing to be able to send remittances to their families inside of Yemen.
Okay. Mr. Ambassador, despite some divisions over what constitutes proportionate and legal action among United Nations Security Council members' response to Houthi attacks, still there is what we call an international front apparent, and this international front is supported by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 27 and 22. My question is, to what extent such divisions, and specifically between US, UK, Russia and China, may complicate a further multilateral action against the Houthis?
Yes, well, as I said earlier, we worked to build a large coalition of countries to work with us across multiple lines of effort to address these unprecedented Houthi attacks on international shipping that are impeding global trade, impeding freedom of navigation, and frankly, making it more difficult for importers to bring critical supplies into Yemen. These coalitions cut across countries across the globe, and we are working with all of our partners, with Security Council members to try to address this issue. I want to call your attention to a Security Council, our actions in the Security Council that brought all members of the Security Council together to condemn the Houthis.
Yes, okay. Now, if we may shift, Mr. Ambassador, to the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, and there have been reduction in the humanitarian response plan budgets, and the recent Brussels meeting, okay, is a clear example of this. According to the Norwegian Council, they said as if the world has turned its back to Yemen, but we know that the United States is the biggest donors to Yemen. How would you elaborate on this?
No, thank you. And the United States remains absolutely committed to meeting the humanitarian needs of the Yemeni people. We were able to announce $220 million in additional humanitarian aid at the meeting in Brussels last week. That brings our total humanitarian aid contributions to Yemen since the conflict began to almost $6 billion. So this remains a priority for the U.S. government. Yemen remains one of the largest recipients of U.S. government humanitarian assistance, and I'm confident that we will continue to be a top donor to meet Yemen's humanitarian needs. We're also working hard to marshal the support of other donors to keep on meeting these needs. And I'll also add that in April, we signed a 5-year assistance agreement, a bilateral agreement between the U.S. government and the Yemeni government that is further demonstration of our commitment to meet the needs of the Yemeni people.
Okay. Now, a final point, if you may, Mr. Ambassador, okay? Now, as you talk, millions of Yemenis are watching and listening to you, and they are worried that peace has been distracted by the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, okay? By the virtue of your position as a top US diplomat, Mr. Ambassador, okay? What would you say to Yemenis, and is peace still possible amid all these challenges?
No, thank you. Let me just say that the Yemeni people deserve better. The Yemeni people deserve an end to this conflict, a comprehensive political resolution, and they deserve to see their country put on the path toward prosperity for the Yemeni population. The United States remains committed to supporting this peace process. I believe we will see it through to the end. We will see that day. As I said in response to some of the other questions, unfortunately, the Houthi attacks have set things back. They're not consistent with the peace process. At the same time, we don't want to lose what we have achieved, which is a truce that's been put in place that's provided some humanitarian relief for the Yemeni people. We do not want to see the parties go back to war inside of Yemen. We stand in absolute opposition to that. We remain committed to meeting the humanitarian needs of the Yemeni people. And we remain committed with working with the international community to transition ultimately from humanitarian support to more development support for Yemen as well. So I would tell the Yemeni people that the United States, and not just the United States, a number of international friends of Yemen, we stand with you. We want to see you prosper. We want your children to prosper. Yemen is a country with a rich history, an amazing history. In fact, with some of the world's most impressive and important historical monuments as well. And Yemen and Yemenis deserve better.
With that hopeful message, Mr. Ambassador, we come to the end of this interview. Thank you so much for talking to Yemen Today TV, and thank you for your time and insights.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. See you next time with a new edition of The Third Dimension.